Sitting in a discreet corner of the restaurant, my heart was pounding like never before. The wedding ring on my hand seemed to weigh tons. The metallic sheen, which had once symbolized promises and dreams, now reflected something bitter, betrayal. They laughed, exchanged complicit glances, as if the world around them were an empty stage and only they were the protagonists. She gestured animatedly while he, the charming chef, leaned over the table, capturing every word like a predator studying its prey. The waiter brought the main course, and I saw my chance. I stood up, approaching with steps that echoed the certainty of a man about to explode a bomb. Without hesitation, I threw my wedding ring into their food. The sound of metal against ceramic interrupted the laughter, replacing it with a silence so dense it could almost be cut with a knife. "Sorry for the interruption," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "Maybe this will help spice up dinner." Her eyes widened, the color fading from her face. A mixture of surprise and barely concealed anger. But at that moment, nothing else mattered. I had turned their farce into a spectacle. What drives a person to this point? This question pulsed through my mind as I walked away, leaving that dinner behind. It wasn't just a question of wounded pride or anger. It was a whirlwind of emotions engulfing me, betrayed love, shattered trust and the sudden realization that I was a stranger in my own history. The discovery began weeks ago, small clues left by her carelessness. Messages hastily deleted, phone calls interrupted with lame excuses. "It's a work thing," she'd say, but something in the tone of her voice wasn't convincing. And then, that forgotten message on her cell phone, sent late at night, "I can't wait to see you tomorrow." The recipient? The boss, the man I knew by name but had never seen as a threat. Until that moment. My hands were shaking as I read the message, but the hatred brought a clarity I didn't know I possessed. I need to check, I thought. That's when I decided to follow her. It was like watching a terrible movie that I couldn't look away from. I saw her getting into his car, the two of them laughing like teenagers on the run. And now, there they were, blatantly celebrating their betrayal, as if the world was incapable of noticing. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her words echoed in my mind. "You're paranoid." But I knew it wasn't paranoia. It was intuition. It was the pain of realizing that us had become her and him. The next morning, I sat in the silence of the kitchen. The coffee was cooling in my cup as I tried to find any trace of what we had. How did we get here? We were the perfect couple, or so I thought. But sometimes perfection is just a facade about to crumble. When the confrontation finally happened, the mask fell. She tried to deny it at first, but there was something in her eyes, something that couldn't be hidden. "It's just friendship," she exclaimed, as if the statement could erase all the evidence. "Friendship?" My voice rose. "Friends don't exchange messages like that. They don't arrange secret meetings." It was then that I realized I wasn't just fighting her. I was fighting the fact that, at some point, I had lost myself in the role of the perfect husband. That night, while she slept in the next room, I made a decision. I would no longer be a passive spectator of my own story. I would face the situation, but on my terms. And so the idea of exposing everything in that restaurant took shape. The moment of the alliance was just the beginning. The immediate impact was obvious, but I knew the ripples would spread. She could no longer hide who she was. So could he. It was only a matter of time before the lies began to crumble. But what haunted me most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the feeling that something bigger was behind it all. There were secrets yet to be revealed, missing pieces in the puzzle. And I was determined to find out. As I left the restaurant, the sound of their laughter was now just a bitter memory. Betrayal can hurt, but it can also open your eyes. And I knew that this story was far from over. The question that haunted me, however, was the cruelest of all: how many lies were still hidden? And, more importantly, was I prepared to deal with the truth when it finally came out? Welcome to our channel. Here, we never support any kind of betrayal. All the stories you'll hear are fictional and serve to show how betrayal can destroy lives and relationships. Get ready to dive into intense narratives, full of emotion and impactful revelations. Now, settle in and get ready for a story that will stir your feelings. Happy listening. Night fell softly as the city lights illuminated the windows of a 10th-floor apartment. Inside, Ethan was adjusting his glasses while reviewing contracts on the living room table. The room was cozy, decorated with a perfect balance of modernity and touches of intimacy that Jenna, his wife, had insisted on including. Travel photos, stacked books, and strategically placed plants showed a home that had been lived in and carefully built over the years. Ethan had always been meticulous, both in his career as a lawyer and in his personal life. He believed that dedication and effort brought results, and his marriage was no exception. Jenna used to say that he had infinite patience, a quality that charmed her from the start. It was something that balanced her restless and creative spirit, a visual artist who lived between paints, ideas, and exhibitions. While Ethan worked, Jenna moved around the kitchen, stirring a pot and humming a familiar tune. She loved to cook on nights when Ethan arrived early, a habit that she said kept them connected, even after years together. There was something comforting about the sound of sizzling oil and the scent that filled the air. Jenna had a gift for turning simple moments into small celebrations, something Ethan deeply admired. Still, Jenna carried a restless air, something that neither her comfortable home nor her attentive husband seemed to completely appease. Her art reflected this, vibrant canvases, with bursts of color that captured contradictory emotions. Although Ethan loved her work, he often found it difficult to understand what Jenna really felt. She was a woman of mystery, something that at the beginning of their relationship attracted him, but which, over time, became challenging. That evening, while Ethan was organizing papers, Jenna approached him with 2 glasses of wine and offered him a smile. He accepted, without noticing the subtle hesitation in her gaze. Jenna had a talent for hiding her emotions, a mechanism she had learned in her youth. She had grown up in a family full of expectations, where any vulnerability was seen as weakness. Ethan was a welcome contrast to that background, patient, kind and predictable. Perhaps too predictable, she thought occasionally. They met unexpectedly, at a charity event. Jenna was exhibiting one of her first works, a daring installation that generated both praise and controversy, and Ethan was there on business, representing a client who was sponsoring the event. The connection between the two was instantaneous, like an invisible thread that brought them together in the crowd. The relationship grew quickly, driven by a mixture of mutual admiration and a desire to create something unique together. But time has a habit of changing even the strongest connections. Over the years, small details began to gather like dust in a forgotten corner. Ethan, consumed by work, sometimes distanced himself without realizing it. Jenna, always looking for something more, felt disconnected from a world that seemed increasingly predictable. Still, they maintained the facade of a stable marriage, and there were moments of true happiness that made them believe they were on the right track. As dinner was served, the conversation flowed casually, touching on everyday topics, work, friends, the plans for the weekend. Ethan mentioned a complicated case at the office, and Jenna talked about a new exhibition she was working on. He listened attentively, but something in his gaze seemed distant, as if her presence there was a guaranteed constant. Jenna noticed these moments, but didn't confront them. Confrontation wasn't part of their dynamic. Later, as Ethan fell asleep on the sofa with a book in his hands, Jenna sat in her studio, surrounded by brushes and unfinished canvases. There was a restlessness inside her that not even art seemed to alleviate. She stared at the white canvas in front of her, feeling an emptiness she didn't know how to fill. Their routine was like a well-rehearsed dance, familiar, comfortable movements, but without the passion of yesteryear. Ethan believed that things were fine, that moments of calm were normal after years together. Jenna, on the other hand, felt like a butterfly trapped in glass, beautiful to watch, but unable to fly. The next morning, the house was silent. Ethan had left early for an important meeting, leaving a note on the kitchen table, "Don't forget to have lunch. Love you." Jenna smiled as she read it, but the gesture, although sweet, seemed mechanical, as if something was missing that she couldn't name. Throughout the day, Jenna immersed herself in her routine. She visited a gallery to discuss details of the next exhibition and had lunch with a friend who always seemed to have an opinion on everything. "And you, how's Ethan?" asked her friend casually. "He's fine. Working hard, as always," replied Jenna, looking away from the coffee on the table. The conversation moved on to other topics, but the question stuck with Jenna like a stone in her shoe. Was she all right? Perhaps that was what bothered her, the uncertainty. That evening, when Ethan returned home, he found Jenna painting in her studio. He watched her for a few minutes before calling her in for dinner, admiring how she seemed so absorbed in what she was doing. It was one of the things he loved most about her, but also one of the things that made him most insecure. Jenna had a whole world inside her, and Ethan sometimes feared he wasn't part of it. While they were eating, Ethan suggested going away for the weekend. "Just the two of us. Some time away from everything," he said, trying to rekindle something that seemed to be fading. "That sounds like a good idea," replied Jenna, although her voice carried a hesitation that he didn't notice. The next few days passed in a blur of work and preparations. The trip seemed like an attempt to relive moments from the past, but Jenna wasn't sure it was what she really needed. Ethan, on the other hand, was determined to make it work. As they packed, Jenna looked at her husband and felt a tightness in her chest. He was a good man, she had never doubted that. But there was a growing distance between them, something that no amount of traveling seemed to be able to fix. As they got into the car for the journey, the smiles were polite, but the silence between the words said more than any conversation. They were both at a turning point, but neither knew for sure how to cross the chasm that separated them. And so, the car continued down the road, while Ethan and Jenna carried not only suitcases, but also the invisible weights of their doubts and hopes. The journey felt like a new beginning. The fresh air of the road brought a sense of freedom, and Ethan drove with the serenity of someone who believed he was on the right track to rekindle something long dormant. Jenna, beside him, gazed out of the window at the landscape, lost in thought. The soft music on the radio filled the silence between them, but not the emptiness they both felt and avoided facing. They arrived at their destination in the late afternoon, and surrounded by mountains and with a view that seemed to have been painted by hand. Ethan chose the location carefully, hoping that the atmosphere would help heal what he felt was broken. Jenna thanked him for his choice with a brief smile, but her eyes revealed something deeper, something she wasn't yet ready to name. The first few hours were pleasant, almost natural. They hiked the trails together, laughed about small shared memories and dined by candlelight in the inn's restaurant. Ethan tried hard to keep the conversation light, but he noticed Jenna's distraction, the way her thoughts always seemed to be elsewhere. It was as if she was physically there, but her mind wandered beyond the mountains that surrounded them. That night, while Ethan slept soundly beside her, Jenna lay awake, staring at the ceiling. There was a latent guilt in her chest, a feeling that something was about to fall apart. She thought of everything they had built together, of the times Ethan had been her anchor in times of turmoil. And yet, there was a gap between them that she didn't know how to fill. The next day, Ethan proposed another walk, but Jenna suggested that he go alone while she spent some time painting. He reluctantly agreed, thinking that it might be good to give her a bit of space. Jenna spent the morning in a small makeshift studio at the inn, her hands moving quickly but without purpose. The colors blended chaotically on the canvas, reflecting the state of her mind. When Ethan returned, he seemed refreshed by the trail, but noticed Jenna's restless gaze. She looked away quickly, as if she feared he might see beyond the surface. He didn't insist. The last thing he wanted to do was push her further away. That evening, during dinner, Jenna's cell phone vibrated on the table. She picked it up quickly, her expression changing briefly before she forced a smile and put it in her handbag. Ethan noticed, but didn't say anything. He was an observant man, and over the last few months he had noticed little gestures like this. He didn't want to be the paranoid husband she had once mocked in stories about friends, but the feeling that something was wrong was impossible to ignore. "Is everything all right?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Yes, of course. Just a message from the gallery," she replied, without looking directly at him. The answer should have reassured him, but it only fueled his doubts. Ethan didn't want to be the kind of man who scoured cell phones or chased shadows, but at that moment, instinct was impossible to ignore. He knew that something had changed between them, and that Jenna was hiding something. The next morning, as Jenna showered, Ethan felt a mixture of guilt and determination. He had to know. With a mixture of hesitation and urgency, he picked up her cell phone and unlocked it. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the messages. At first, nothing caught his attention, until he found an archived conversation. The exchange was intimate, full of emojis and words he had never heard Jenna use with him. The confirmation of betrayal fell on Ethan like a physical blow. He felt his stomach churn and had to sit down to process it. The messages left no doubt, Jenna was involved with someone else, and it wasn't something recent. Every word was like a stab, but what hurt the most was noticing the tone of enthusiasm in her messages, something he hadn't seen in a while in the look she gave him. When Jenna came out of the shower, she found Ethan sitting on the edge of the bed, holding her cell phone. The silence in the room was deafening. She knew immediately what had happened. "Ethan," she began, but he held up his hand, interrupting her. "There's no need. I've seen enough." His voice was calm, but filled with such deep pain that Jenna could hardly bear to look at him. She opened her mouth to explain, but there were no words that could erase what he had discovered. Ethan got up, grabbed his coat and left without saying another word. Jenna stayed in the bedroom, her cell phone still on the bed. Guilt consumed her, but there was also a perverse relief that she had finally come out of the shadows. She knew she would have to face the consequences, but at that moment, all she could think about was the look in Ethan's eyes before she left. Ethan, for his part, walked aimlessly along the paths near the inn, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He didn't know what to do. Part of him wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but another part felt that nothing she could say could change what had been destroyed. As the sun began to set, he finally decided to go back. Jenna was sitting on the balcony, hugging her knees, her face streaked with tears. She saw him coming and hesitantly stood up. "Ethan, I'm so sorry." His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Why?" he asked, his voice heavy with emotion. "Why?" Jenna looked away, unable to face him directly. "I don't know. There's no simple answer." "No simple answer." Ethan's voice grew louder, control beginning to slip away. "I built my life around you, and you destroyed it for what? For fun? Out of curiosity?" She remained silent, and the weight of his words hung between them like a specter. Ethan shook his head, laughing bitterly. "I guess it doesn't matter." He went into the bedroom, grabbed some clothes and went out again, leaving Jenna alone on the balcony. The sound of the door closing echoed like an end. As Ethan drove along the dark road, an idea began to form in his mind. Something he had ignored in the messages, a clue that didn't seem to fit. He knew it wasn't just about the betrayal. There was something more, something Jenna was hiding, and he was determined to find out. Ethan was sitting in his armchair in the makeshift office he had set up in a small rented apartment. Jenna's betrayal was still an open wound that throbbed constantly. He avoided looking at the cell phone on the table, knowing that he might find more fragments of the truth that he preferred not to face. Ever since he had left the inn that night, everything had seemed like a blur. But something was bothering him, a piece of the puzzle that he still couldn't fit together. The message he had read, "Tomorrow, we will finally be free," echoed in his mind. It didn't make sense. It wasn't just about betrayal, there was something more. Jenna had never mentioned financial dissatisfaction or the desire to leave the marriage so definitively. The phrase, so loaded with meaning, seemed to suggest a plan. Ethan knew he had to find out the truth, even if it destroyed him completely. The following afternoon, he made up his mind. After hours of struggling with himself, he decided to call Jenna. His tone of voice was cold but controlled. "I need to talk to you. Meet me at the cafe where we always went." Jenna hesitated on the other end of the line. Her voice sounded dejected. "Ethan, it's not a request. It's something you owe me," he interrupted her sharply. There was a silence on the other end, followed by a resigned sigh. "I'll be there at 6. When she arrived at the cafe, Ethan was already waiting at a table in the corner. He didn't look at her immediately, concentrating on the coffee that was slowly swirling in his cup. When he finally looked up, Jenna's expression was a mixture of guilt and anxiety. "Thanks for coming," she began, but Ethan held up his hand to silence her. "No, Jenna. Don't thank me. I'm here because I need answers." She looked away, fiddling with the rings on her fingers, a habit he recognized as nervousness. "I know I've hurt you more than I can fix." "Hurt?" Ethan interrupted her, his voice laden with bitter irony. "That's too light for what you did. I want to know why. And don't give me excuses about being confused. I want the truth." Jenna swallowed, feeling the weight of his words. She knew this moment was inevitable, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. It wasn't just about us," she began, the words coming out hesitantly. "It was about something bigger." Ethan frowned, crossing his arms. "Something bigger? What the hell does that mean, Jenna?" She finally faced him, her eyes watering. "He's not just my boss." The revelation dropped like a bombshell, but Ethan remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "He's someone who," Jenna paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "He knew things about you. Things that could destroy you." Ethan leaned forward, the anger in his gaze now accompanied by something else, confusion and fear. "What does he know?" Jenna lowered her head, unable to bear his gaze. "During the merger of your company, he discovered financial movements. Ethan, he has proof that are you implying that I committed fraud?" He stood up, his voice raised, attracting glances from other tables. "No, not exactly. But the transactions you signed, without knowing it, he investigated them. Ethan, he has documents that could ruin your career. He used them to manipulate me." Ethan's blood ran cold. He began to put the pieces together, remembering the contracts he had hastily signed on the recommendation of trusted partners. "He used you to get to me?" Jenna nodded, the tears finally flowing. "I was desperate. When he approached me, he said he just needed access to your accounts, something to validate his suspicions. But things got out of hand." Ethan took a step back, nausea rising in his throat. "Did you get involved with him to protect me? Or was it just an excuse for what you really wanted to do?" "Ethan, I never wanted things to come to this." "And now?" he asked, his eyes fixed on her. "What's his plan?" Jenna hesitated before answering. "He said that if I broke up with you, he'd erase everything. That all I had to do was stand by him, and you'd be free of any charges." Ethan shook his head in disbelief. "You sacrificed our marriage for a man who manipulated you? For a plan that was probably never about saving me? It's not that simple." She shouted, her voice shaking. "No." Ethan's voice was as cold as ice. "Then explain it to me, Jenna. Because, at the moment, it feels like you've destroyed me to save your own skin." The silence that followed was deafening. Jenna had no more words, and Ethan realized that whatever there was between them was irretrievably lost. He stood up, leaving some notes on the table. "Don't try to look for me. You've made your decision, now I'll make mine." As he left, Jenna remained seated, staring into the void. She knew Ethan was right, but that didn't lessen the pain of losing everything. Ethan, for his part, felt his anger turn to determination. If there was one thing he had learned throughout his life, it was that he should never underestimate his own ability to get back on his feet. He now had a new goal, to confront the man who had destroyed his life and regain control. With a heavy heart but renewed focus, Ethan got into his car and began planning his next move. The game was far from over, and he would no longer be a victim of circumstance. Ethan drove through the streets illuminated by the yellowish light of the street lamps, his thoughts spinning like a whirlwind impossible to control. Jenna's every word still resonated in his mind, but it wasn't the physical betrayal that hit him hardest, it was the fact that she had allowed someone to use her vulnerability to undermine what he held sacred. He knew he needed to face the situation head-on, but the pain made him hesitate. Parking in front of a small, discreet bar, Ethan went in and ordered a whiskey. He needed time to think before taking the next step. The atmosphere was dark, stuffy, with soft music playing in the background. The bar was almost empty, except for a couple at a table in the corner and a middle-aged man sitting at the counter, absorbed in his own glass. Ethan sat on a high stool and stared into his drink, as if the answer lay at the bottom of the glass. As he swirled the amber liquid in his hand, his mind finally focused. He knew where he needed to go. It wasn't a question of a direct confrontation with Jenna, but with the man she had described, the boss. He was the key to everything, and Ethan wouldn't rest until he got the answers he needed. He got up, threw some bills on the counter and left. The cold night air hit him like a wave, clearing his mind. He knew that the office where the man worked stayed open late, and with luck, he would still be there. Grabbing his cell phone, Ethan quickly typed his boss's name into a search app and confirmed the office address. When he arrived, he found the building almost empty, except for the light emanating from the corner of a window on the third floor. Ethan entered without hesitation, quickly climbed the stairs and found the door half open. He knocked, but didn't wait for an answer. He entered with firm steps, and the man looked up from his laptop, visibly surprised. "Ethan," said the man, his tone of voice a mixture of surprise and caution. "What are you doing here at this hour?" Ethan approached, crossing his arms, his expression as rigid as stone. "I think you know very well why I'm here." The man leaned back in his chair, trying to keep his composure. "I don't know what you're talking about. But if you have something to discuss, we can arrange a suitable time." "A suitable time?" Ethan gave a short, cold laugh. "After everything you've done, do you really think I'm going to wait for a polite invitation?" The boss frowned, but didn't answer right away. He seemed to be calculating his next steps. "Look, Ethan, if this is about work, I suggest you talk to your lawyer. I really don't know what you want." Ethan hit the table with the back of his hand, making the papers on it jump. "Stop lying. I know what you've been doing. I know that you manipulated Jenna, that you used my name and my company as a tool for your schemes." The man finally relaxed in his chair, letting out a lopsided smile. "So she did." Ethan clenched his fists, controlling the urge to cross the table. "Yes, she did. Now I want to hear it from you." "Why?" The boss leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Ethan's. "Because you're convenient, Ethan. You always have been. An honest, dedicated, respected man. People like you are easy to use, especially when they don't pay attention to detail." Ethan felt his blood boil, but he kept his tone low and controlled. "You gambled with my life, with my marriage. Why?" The man let out a bitter laugh. "Don't moralize. Do you think this world rewards the honest?" "No, Ethan, it rewards the clever." "Smart?" Ethan replied, taking a step forward. "There's nothing clever about destroying other people's lives to achieve your goals." The boss shook his head slowly, as if regretting Ethan's naivety. "Maybe you don't understand now, but one day you will. This is just business." "Business?" Ethan snorted, his anger now clearly visible. You used my wife, you destroyed my marriage. This goes far beyond business. The silence that followed was interrupted only by the sound of the clock on the wall. Ethan waited for the man to say something, but he remained silent, just watching, as if calculating his next move. It doesn't end here, Ethan continued. I won't stop until you pay for everything you've done. Without waiting for an answer, Ethan left the office, slamming the door behind him. Every step in the corridor seemed to echo his determination. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face the consequences and fight for what was right. The truth was in front of him, but the wounds ran deep, and Ethan knew he would need more than courage to move forward. He would need justice. Justice not just for himself, but for all the lies and betrayals that had led him to this moment. As he drove home, the only thing clear in his mind was that this battle had only just begun. Ethan spent the next few hours immersed in a whirlwind of thoughts. The meeting with Jenna's boss had brought him more answers than he had expected, but it had also left him with new questions and an overwhelming sense of urgency. He wasn't just a victim of his wife's betrayal, he was now a man at a crossroads, fighting against forces that seemed much bigger than him. At dawn, sitting at the kitchen table in his temporary apartment, he analyzed the documents he had gathered. Contracts, bank records and emails sent by old partners. His boss's words echoed in his mind, "You're convenient, Ethan. Always have been." Every signature he had put down, trusting in the good faith of others, now looked like evidence of carelessness. He felt a mixture of shame and anger. How had he allowed things to get to this point? Jenna's betrayal was painful enough, but realizing that he had been used as a pawn in a power play disgusted him. He ran his hands over his face, exhausted, and wondered how many people knew about this before he did. Jenna was clearly aware of more than she had confessed. And the boss? He seemed implacable, someone who would never back down in the face of a threat. A notification on her cell phone interrupted her thoughts. It was a message from an old colleague, someone Ethan respected but hadn't been in touch with for years. The message read, "Ethan, I've heard rumors about what's going on. I think you need to know something. Call me as soon as you can." He hesitated, but dialed the number. The voice on the other end sounded tense. "Ethan, I don't know how to tell you this, but what's happening didn't start yesterday. This guy you're dealing with, he has a history. People like him don't make random moves. Do you know anything specific?" Ethan asked, trying to hide his nervousness. "Just that you weren't the first. He's done it before, with others. And it usually ends badly for those who stand in his way. Be careful, Ethan." The call ended, but it left Ethan uneasy. It wasn't just a power play, it was a well-calculated strategy of destruction. He knew he had to act quickly, but he couldn't do it alone. With renewed determination, Ethan decided it was time to confront Jenna again. He needed to know how far she was involved and, more importantly, if she was still on his side in any way. On the way to the studio where she used to spend her mornings, he felt a mixture of anger and anxiety. As much as he wanted answers, he feared what they might mean. When he arrived, he found Jenna sitting in front of a blank canvas, her brushes scattered around her. She looked lost, her shoulders bowed as if they were carrying the weight of the world. When she saw him, she raised her head, surprised and hesitant. "Ethan? What are you doing here?" He closed the door behind him, keeping his gaze fixed on her. "We need to talk. And this time, I want the whole truth. No excuses, no omissions." She looked away, nervously fiddling with her brushes. "I've already told you everything." "No, you haven't," he interrupted her, his voice firm. "I know that this goes far beyond betrayal. I know that he didn't just manipulate you, but used you as part of a bigger plan. I want to know exactly what you knew and why you agreed to be part of it." Jenna hesitated, as if fighting against herself. Finally, she let out a heavy sigh and began to speak. "When he approached me, I didn't know what was really going on. He said it was just a question of safety, that he wanted to prevent you from being involved in something bigger. At first, it seemed like he was helping. But then it became clear that he had other motives. And yet you carried on, Ethan retorted, frustration evident in his voice. I thought I could control the situation. Jenna replied, her voice rising in pitch. I thought that if I did what he wanted, I could protect you. But I didn't realize how much I was being used myself. Ethan moved closer, crossing his arms as he stared at her. And now? Where does that leave us? Jenna lowered her head, tears streaming down her face. I don't know, Ethan. I don't know how to fix it. Maybe it's not something that can be fixed, he said, his voice low but charged with emotion. The silence between them was almost palpable. Jenna seemed to want to say something more, but couldn't find the words. Ethan took a step back, feeling that, despite all the answers, he was still at the same starting point, lost and betrayed. As he left the studio, he felt a heavier weight on his shoulders. The truth had been revealed, but that didn't make things any easier. He knew that there was still more to discover, and that the battle was far from over. However, one thing was clear, he would not back down. Not as long as there was something to fight for. Ethan was standing in front of the building where it had all begun. The office of Jenna's boss was a symbol of everything that had been destroyed in his life, his marriage, his confidence, and the career he had built with so much effort. The cold night wind seemed to be a harbinger that something decisive was about to happen. He held a folder full of documents, evidence that he had spent weeks gathering. If that didn't resolve the situation, nothing else would. As he entered the building, Ethan's footsteps echoed down the empty corridor. He knew his boss would be there. Men like him never left work behind, their power was wielded in silence, away from prying eyes. Ethan opened the door without knocking, surprising the man, who looked up with an expression of irritation quickly replaced by caution. I thought you'd understood your place, said the boss, leaning back in his chair. And I thought you were smarter than that, Ethan replied, throwing his briefcase on the table. The man opened the folder carefully, his eyes scanning the documents. His expression grew darker with each page. Where did you get these? Let's just say that some of your previous victims were more willing to talk than you thought, Ethan said, crossing his arms. You left a trail, and now I have enough evidence to finish you off. The boss laughed, but the tension on his face was evident. And what do you intend to do? Take it to the police? Good luck trying to clear your own name in the process. Ethan leaned over the table, his gaze fixed on the man in front of him. I don't need to clear my name. I know what I've done, and I'm willing to face the consequences. But you? You're a pest, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. The boss stood up abruptly, his chair creaking with the movement. You don't know who you're dealing with. Ethan kept his posture firm. Maybe I don't. But neither do you. He turned and left the room, leaving his briefcase on the table. There was nothing more to say. The next step was no longer up to him, it was up to justice. Over the next few days, allegations began to emerge. Local newspapers and investigative blogs published stories based on the evidence Ethan had provided. The boss tried to deny everything, but the volume of evidence was overwhelming. His career was destroyed and he became the target of criminal investigations. The world he had built on manipulation and lies crumbled. As for Jenna, she watched from afar, feeling overwhelmed by guilt. Her attempt to protect Ethan had turned into a complete disaster. She tried to contact him several times, but Ethan ignored all her calls. He knew he needed distance to rebuild his life. Jenna, for her part, immersed herself in her art, creating works that reflected her pain and regret. Her latest exhibition attracted attention for its emotional intensity, but for her, it was just a way of dealing with the emptiness that now inhabited her life. Ethan began to rebuild his life slowly. He knew that the scars of betrayal and manipulation would never completely disappear, but he decided that he wouldn't allow them to define him. He went back to work, this time in a small firm where he could practice his profession without the pressure of the corporate world. During this process, he met someone. A woman who had also faced difficulties and, like him, was learning to start again. They started out as friends, but gradually something deeper began to emerge. The final meeting with Jenna took place almost a year later. They met in a park, under the golden leaves of autumn. Jenna seemed different, more serious, but also calmer. Ethan had changed too. He seemed more sure of himself, more at peace. "Thank you for coming," said Jenna, her voice soft. "I thought we should call it a night," replied Ethan, taking a seat on a bench next to her. "I just want you to know that it was never my intention to hurt you." Ethan nodded slowly. "I know that. But sometimes good intentions aren't enough." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the leaves fall in the wind. Finally, Jenna sighed. "I hope you find happiness." "And I hope you find peace," said Ethan, getting up. They said goodbye without words, but there was something final about that moment. They would each go their separate ways, carrying the lessons of what had happened. As Ethan walked through the park, he felt something he hadn't felt for a long time: hope. He knew that his journey was just beginning, but he was ready to face whatever came, with the certainty that the future could still bring something good. Now that the story has come to an end, leave a comment and share your opinion. What did you think of each character's choices? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this one. And remember, we don't support any kind of betrayal here. See you next time.